So a little bit about his background. He was one of the founders of Shoot, which raised $16 million, and he ended up exiting that company. We're going to ask him questions on that. He exited a bunch of other companies and founded over a dozen companies. We're also going to figure out some of the ways that he sets up entrepreneurs for success and how we can set up our 2020 for an amazing year. So what I want to start with, Gregarious, I'll hand you this microphone. Tell us something interesting about yourself that we wouldn't typically know.
Interesting. Well, that's a pretty easy one, I think, these days, but I think a lot of people do know. Last year, I moved here to Denver actually a year ago. Oh. Hello? Yeah. I moved here January 20th, actually, or 22nd was my first day in Denver a year ago. So it's been an interesting journey, and for some reason, when I got here, I decided post San Francisco life, I could sort of be like whoever I want to be now, like reinvent myself, have a new chance to do it. It was a little scary, you know. It's you know, moving to a new city. Like I turned 45 this month, you know, having to make friends again, like all those things, really challenging. But one of the goals that I set for some ridiculous reason was that I challenged myself to become a bodybuilder. So last year, I didn't really know I was going to do this actually when the year started. I watched, you know, I have a lot of YouTube subscriptions, and I was watching this young kid. It's like I've watched him since my son was born, like 5 years now. And he started doing this summer shredding challenge. And then after watching him for 3 years, I'm like, why am I watching someone lose weight? And I was like, why don't I do it? So I was like, fine, I'll do it. So I finally, I entered this online contest. You pay $20, and then you basically do whatever the hell you're gonna do to try and look the best transformation that you possibly can. So I went from March 15th or something, I was 145 pounds to 126 pounds by June 1st, I think it was. So it was about 12 weeks, 112 days of dieting. And then I was like, that's interesting, but it was an online contest, so it wasn't really quite there. But once you get through the process, you sort of learn a lot about it. And you're like, oh, I think I could do that. But the thing that inspired me to actually do the bodybuilding was that I'd never posted a picture of myself without a shirt on anywhere. And I shared one picture finally, proud of the event. And then all of these people reached out to me for advice and help. And they were saying they were inspired and they wanted to do this as well. And for me, a lot of the time I spend with founders is, as much as it is on the tactical things, like how to run your business better, how to position what you do better, I'm much more focused, and part of why I like being in Denver is on finding a better work-life sort of integration, right? And it was been my goal to sort of have fitness become more of a part of founders' lives, because I feel like they ruin themselves in the process of trying to get a company off the ground, right? And there's a lot of debts that I talk about in that regard. We have sleep debt, we have physical debt, we have our financial debts, all these debts, our relationship debt. We give up a lot of things in the process of starting a company often. And then so I said, well, how can I make founders take me seriously? What's the most crazy thing I could do to just have them not question me on it? And I was like, I don't want to become a dietitian, I don't want to do anything else. So I was like, screw it. A picture of me on stage at a bodybuilding show will be all the resume I need, basically, to have you start to really pay attention to me if I was telling you to take this advice, to go do this way or be a certain way. So that's what I did, and I did my first show on December 1st, and I got 4 medals, 1 first place for being old in a category by myself, 2 third place, and 1 fourth place. So I'm doing my next show August 22nd, and so all my friends here know I go through these wild mood swings of not being able to eat anything and then drinking and eating whatever I want. And so I'm right now in the process of going upwards again.
Awesome. And you're also sharing about doing a lot of mentoring, and you shared that you inspired a lot of people just by doing the bodybuilding, and they reached out to you. Is the reason you do mentoring to inspire people, or what's the reason behind doing so much mentoring and so much help for entrepreneurs?
There's 2 parts to it. I would say the bigger part is entirely selfish. I think mentoring is one of the most valuable things that you can do for yourself, because you learn a tremendous amount in the process of helping other people, right? And I do a live show once a week, or well, I do 2 live shows a week usually, about founder topics. And yesterday's topic, actually, we were talking about this idea that that you are someone's goal. We were talking about this last night, but the idea that like everyone is an inspiration to someone else for something, right? It could be a small thing, it could be a big thing. And what I found, like in time and with the experiences I've had, I don't think you know something until you teach it, right? So otherwise, just sort of passive stuff in your head, right? But until you teach it, you don't remove all the crufty parts that don't matter to like get to the salient bits. And so being a mentor forces you to teach the things that you actually have experienced, and that process, I think, is where you get the most benefit, right? The secondary part, of course, is like, this is my home now, and I want to see this community do better, be better, and mature. And so I want to offer and help as much as I can to see that happen.
When I remember being in college and I was trying to study certain materials or like chemistry or something, and I found it really difficult to study something. But then once I started teaching it to someone else, I instantly was going to get a better grade. I instantly was going to retain the information more. So it makes sense why you are helping others, because not only are you growing, but you're really helping out the community. And I think you've already helped out the community a lot. So I am kind of curious about Shoot, because I haven't really talked to you too much about it before. Can you tell me how it was? Let's first talk about how it was raising money for this and how it was being one of the founders of Shoot, and tell us a little bit about it.
So Shoot was, everything feels like all like sliding in from one thing into the next. And so back when Shoot was starting, the 2 or 3 years before that, I actually had a web development, like a product strategy shop. We built prototypes for companies. I had 40 employees in India. I used to live in India like a third of the time. And the interesting thing was, like, while we were there, we started making this product, and that was not Shoot. It was this other thing called Lilgrams. It was a baby book for new parents, right? And then I got married, and so I went away, and I came back from my wedding. I'm like, where the F are all my photos, right? And then I started thinking, I'm like, wait a minute, where the hell are all the baby pictures? Shouldn't there be like 1 billion photos in our service now, like from parents? And we started just realizing, I was like, you know what's wrong? All the photos, and this is 2011 or 10, so there's no Dropbox yet. None of these other tools exist, and I was like, the photos are stuck on the phone. And I was like, we need to build something to back it, we need to get them off of the phone. And so that was like the inspiration for Shoot. And we just raised like $75,000 right then for Lilgrams to like add book printing to the business. And it was like, I remember it was January 3rd, I was in New York. I was in the Ace Hotel in the lobby and basically running around doing consumer research, like asking people questions randomly, like in the hotel, calling everybody I knew to like figure out like and test this idea. And then we called our investor and said, we're gonna go do this, you want your money back? And they're like, no, we like this idea better. So we got the 75,000, we started with that. That was the first time we raised for one of our ventures. Most of the companies I did in the past were bootstrapped. And so the fundraising process, you hear a lot of stories about how negative it can be, right? And like how exhausting it can be as well sometimes, right? Like there's a lot of no's often in the process. We got a lot of no's. We got told all kinds of things that none of which were proven to be true, like in the long term. But that's sort of the way it goes. But I remember that first money we raised, that 75,000. It was January. I like flew. We had like 9 people working on it. Like we spent that 75,000 over the course of like 4 months. And I remember getting into Jason Calacanis has this event called the Launch Conference, which you may have heard of, but it was the first launch conference. Like it was the first one ever. And one of the investors in Clout, the company I was helping. Can
you tell me like what year this was or how old you are at this time?
This was 2011. So what's that? 9 years ago?
This is still before Dropbox.
This is before Dropbox. Well, Dropbox was starting. I think Dropbox started like 2009, but they weren't backing up photos from your phone. They were doing like just file syncing, right? So so we got the money and like we got into this launch conference thing, and so we had 54 days before the conference. So we built a desktop app, a mobile app, an API, a website, a Chrome extension, iOS and Android, and pitched. Like I got up, I pitched, like I had to memorize a pitch. It was like the worst thing in my life. I hate memorizing things. And we get up on stage, and then we tied for first place, but it took like 7 revotes behind the scenes, and then they finally picked the other guys. And so those other guys, by the way, got acquired by Twitter later, right? And then we went on and we actually didn't raise money. We raised like $100,000 or something from some investors. This is the other thing I think it's interesting, like, just like when you're starting a company, most often, whatever it is you think you'll be doing when you start is not what you'll be doing when you end, right? And it's just the way it goes. Like, so when we started, we were like, we're gonna build an app to back up photos, and then we were too scared to launch it because we're like, holy shit, if we actually started just backing up everyone's photos, how are we gonna pay for this, right? And we should have just done it, but we didn't. And so instead we started pitching and pivoted to like, I had this like separate idea of like, well, what if we built an API for other developers to integrate photo tools into their stuff? And somehow that was a little more interesting. And so we raised some money on that, and we got like $100,000 from some small angels. That got us up to where we got into Y Combinator, which is winter of 2012. Literally, we were out of money, like completely. The day we got the check from Y Combinator, like the first day they give you the check, it's like $150,000, and we're like, holy shit! Like we almost like that was it. We had no money left. Like we were on fumes. Like we went a whole year on like $150,000 with like 8 or 9 people scattered across the world.
Can we stop here for one second? How was the mindset with you and your partners when you had very little money?
It's the mindset you should always have, right? Which is, what can we do and how can we save money in the process of doing it, right?
Did you feel like you were going to get this $150,000?
No. Like, I think we talked to like 30 or 40 angels before we got, it was kind of like A/B testing. Like we went out, my partner was trying this other idea out, and then I sort of slipped in and tried like this other idea, and then I gave him that idea, and then he pitched it, and then finally like that turned the corner, and we got some people. But that was a surprise. Like we thought the app would have gotten the money.
So then once you did get the funding, what happened?
So then you get a Y Combinator, and does anyone know what Y Combinator is? It's like an accelerator thing, right? 3 months of sort of intensive stuff. But here's the thing. The program itself there's no structure to it. It's just like, go get a lot of shit done as quickly as possible because like there's a demo day at the end, right? And so you really have to be extremely self-motivated. So we were working like 12 hours a day, 6-7 days a week for 3 months, right? To like launch the product, get it to whatever state we could, and then prepare a pitch for it at the end.
So let's jump to the exit of this company.
Yeah.
How did that go? Was that really good? Did you get a lot out of that? Did it not work out so well?
It was terrible. It was so yeah, I wish I could tell you it was great. But we had the business like was doing well. We were growing. We had like gotten to like a quarter where we'd probably gotten up to 1.2 million like in one quarter, and then literally next quarter shit the bed. Like half the revenue was gone, right? And then we had to build it back up from scratch. And part of the problem was, just a fair warning for anyone building on top of other people's things, we were built like on top of Instagram. And they did a lot of stuff, made a lot of changes that you don't have control over. And as a result, those changes had like a pretty dramatic impact on our business. At the same time, we also had like more competitive forces coming in because we were like a mid-tier solution in our space. And then there was like dudes offering it for $99, right? And so that sort of started to add more competition to the mix. And so we grew our revenue back up. We were doing millions in revenue, but we just couldn't justify really raising more money to keep the company going. And so we ended up selling the company.
Okay. And then you said when you did, every single failure was a growth opportunity. What would you say are some of the things that you learned and took away from that experience?
Well, don't mess with Instagram. That's lesson number 1, I would say for sure. I think, when I look at, we made a lot of, we probably made all the mistakes you can make, right? Like, we're growing our company. So our company was, we got to about 50 people. We were in about 7 or 8 cities. I would say like growing too fast is definitely one mistake that a lot of people make. I was actually doing a podcast earlier today, and I told them, I was like, you shouldn't hire until you are in extreme pain, right? Like Mike, same advice I give Mike, right? Like, which is good. He's at the right time where he should hire, because like what happens is, here's the problem. Like the best analogy I could give you is like, like when you're like, I just don't feel good. Well, until you know what's wrong, you can't take medicine, and that new hire is medicine for what actually is ailing you. But you can't just hire someone to make you feel less frustrated. That's your job, right? You can't hire someone to make you feel less stressed out. That's your job, right? Like, so don't confuse all of the things that you can't get rid of with the things that you actually can get rid of, right? And so too often people feel like, especially like developers do this a lot, but you see it often, right? They do these premature optimizations, right? Like they sort of plan ahead for all this growth they're gonna have, but they don't have the growth, right? And so that becomes a liability that you carry over time, right? So I think like growing too fast is extremely dangerous, right? I would say another thing, a good lesson is, if you're a founder, I highly recommend that you sell for as long as possible, right? Like, do not hire salespeople, do not outsource sales. There is a tremendous amount of like customer intelligence and learning that happens in the process of you talking to actual customers that you will not be able to really outsource, or you will not be able to benefit from if someone else is getting that intelligence, right? Because if someone's just trying to close the deal and doesn't care about the business, then they're never going to convey the things that maybe might make all the difference in like your long-term success, right? So don't outsource sales, like I think for as long as humanly possible. Do outsource the things that you're not good at though, right? Like, so if you are a, a business founder, right? Like, or operations oriented person, and you don't know how to do engineering, hire engineering out. Like I think it's an okay strategy. Now here's the thing. If you're gonna raise money, that pathway is not optimal, but what's better, having something or not having something, right? Like you sort of have to really measure it again, like weigh out the odds on it, right? But I think like engineering is more affordable, more accessible these days, for example. Like I would pay other people to do that, right? If you were making a shirt or an apparel line, you wouldn't go buy all the equipment to make apparel, would you, right? So why would you go buy everything to be an engineering shop if that's not your specialty either, right? So I recommend growing into what you need. Certain circumstances, like if you want to raise money, for example, when we raised money, we had like half of our team in India, and they don't like when, like back then, there was still more of a bias around people all being in the same place even, right? So you've got to do what's right for you, right? And I think like, if an investor or investment is sort of something that you do need to factor in, then you want to weigh those concerns, but don't over optimize for them, right? Because if you try to do everything that they want before you're ready to do those things, it will force you to grow faster than you want as well, right?
So I love how you just got into a bunch of value bombs because you have founded so many companies. So actually, let's do that. Let's talk about some of the pieces that you can help us with. So just let me get a sense of the room. Who in here, raise your hand, has your own business? Okay, and that looks like 90% of the room. Who in here has had the business for about 0 to 6 months? Raise your hand. Who in here has had it 6 months to a year and a half? And who in here has had it 2+ years? Okay, excellent. So that was actually the most who had it 2+ years. So real quick, let's do a little tip for anybody that's in 0 to 2 years. When you're starting your company, what are some things that you really need to focus on?
0 to 2 years, I would say probably in an overarching manner, being customer oriented is ultimately the universal rule, right? So you have to listen to sort of your customers first and foremost, probably at every stage of your business, right? Now, I think the mistake, for example, that you make early on is listening too close to your customers, right? So I'm gonna give you a secret. Customers are morons, right? Not because they aren't good people and not because they're not smart, but because their toolkit is different than your toolkit, right? So the way that we create value is by leveraging the things we know that they don't know to solve their problems in new and innovative ways. So if you ask somebody that has a saw in their hand how to get out of this room, they're gonna tell you we should saw our way out. And you're like, but I have a laser, right? And so that's the problem, right? If you listen too closely to your customers, what will happen is they will describe the solution that either is specific to them or that is specific to the universe and tools that they own. But you don't have to live with those tools, and you don't have to work with those tools. And so you need to define and lead them to the place that they want to get to in spite of what they're saying. Now, you can't change people, right? Like, so here's the important thing, right? You can't create new behavior, however, right, unless it is maximally rewarding to do it, right? So you want to find ways to adapt whatever your new laser is to their saw, right? But the reality is, eventually, no one will ever remember what a saw was anyway, right? So I think that's the big mistake that most companies make when you're small, is that you maybe over-index, right? I think another mistake a lot of times early companies make, or an option that you may have, a lot of us will do consulting of one form or another, or services as part of like getting going if we're building like a software or something meant to be repeatable, right? That's great, but you got to be careful with that, because again, it's the same thing where you become an on-demand shop for somebody else as opposed to building towards a destiny that you want to actually create, right?
So that was an extremely good tip. I actually want to back up a little bit more as well. So, you know, if you're taking too much information from your customers, maybe it's just too directed towards them. What about if you're very early, let's say that 0 to 6 month period where you know, there's a lot of people that create a product like, this is the best product ever, I'm going to bring this product to the market, but they haven't actually interviewed anyone first. So what about actually getting out there initially when you're very early to find out that need in the market?
So it's a good question. Again, so if you're very early and you're trying to vet an idea, right? How do you understand if an idea is worth doing? Like, should I pursue this as a business, right? It's not that complicated, right? And so I like to use a marketer's mindset from the beginning as we approach like framing a business opportunity, right? So I like to think in terms of go-to-market. So I ask myself the question, well, who are the kinds of customers for this idea or this product? How would I find them if I was gonna like say advertise to them? So like in a workshop I'll do usually like with founders, I'll like make them go design the ads on Facebook to show me how they would actually, or LinkedIn or wherever it may be, but show me how you would target those people. And if you can't do that, then you don't have a customer base. And if you don't have a customer base, then you don't have a business, right? So if you have an idea, but I'll give you an example. I read this in a book somewhere. Somebody was like, oh, we want to make a product that's like for gamers, and we're going to sell them these things, right? And then the point that it misses is that most of the gamers who play that game are like 12 years old, don't have access to their own money, and it's illegal for you to communicate with them. So you actually, your customer is their parents, right? And then now it's a different kind of customer. You have to make a different kind of pitch, right? And so that's the idea, is that if you can't identify the customer, AKA you can't find a way to reach them, then you don't have a business. There is no business if there is no customer. And so most ideas fall apart the second you actually try and do that, right? Because someone will say like, I want to do this thing, like, oh, I want to, you know, this little optimization, which I think is the best thing in the world. I'm like, well, fine, find me 10 people who even think that's a thing, right? But more importantly, find me a way to find people you don't know who think that's a thing. And if you could do that, then maybe it's an idea worth pursuing. Because guess what? If you can find them to advertise to them, you can find them to ask them questions. And if you can ask them questions, you can get the directional ideas about if this may be valuable to them and if they'd be willing to part ways with something of value of their own.
I turned it off for a second. So I think this one's crisp and a bunch. What we're actually going to do is open it up to questions, because I could keep asking you questions for a very long time. So what I'm going to do is hand you the microphone, and feel free to pass it to whoever has a question afterwards.
Awesome. My name is Mark. So that kind of triggered a thought of mine. So I'm early on in an idea, so I can't quite call it a business yet. But I think our ideal customer is not our user. So who would be purchasing? We have kind of like a rough idea about a freemium kind of product, but our customer wouldn't be the user. The user wouldn't be hard to market towards, and it wouldn't be hard to get in contact and really get content into their hands. But I think the actual customer, the purchaser of the product, might be more challenging. So I guess can you talk a little bit about maybe the challenge? This is software or
Yeah,
app.
sure.
Customer versus user, and kind of how to.
So, yeah, it's a great question, actually. I have a post. I don't remember where it is, but I can find it. So you got to remember, every time you sell something, there's three buyers always in play, right? There's the user buyer, which is the person who actually uses that product. There's the financial buyer, which is the person that pays for that product. And then there's the executive buyer, which is the person who approves that purchase, right? And so in that same workshop when I would do this, it's like a spreadsheet, and I basically put a column, and I put in like a reachability score. And so, for example, like you're in education, right? So if you're selling into a household, right? Let's say it's a mom or a dad. Oh, yeah, turn that one on. The battery's just fading on it. So if you're selling into a household, the score might be 1, right? Because the mom or dad makes all the decisions, they allocate the money, and they are the user of the product, right? If you're selling for a child, the score is 2, because the user is the child, but the buyer, the financial and the executive buyer is the parent, right? If you're selling into the enterprise, right, like that's minimally 3, but there may be many other layers. And if you're selling to government, it may be 100 layers, right? And so an ideal business has the smallest reachability score because you have to sell the fewest number of times, right? Now, the thing to think about, I guess, right, is to make sure that you have a pitch ready for every kind of buyer, right? And so the user buyer, remember, they love this thing because it makes their job, it frees up time for them to do whatever they want to do at work instead of doing that thing anymore. So users tend to be excited, right? The executive has an entirely different set of objectives, though, than the user, right? And the financial person probably doesn't give a crap. They just want to know, like, do we want this? And have we checked to make sure it's in scope relative to, like, the other solutions that might be out there, right? So from an organizational point of view or industry point of view, you can sort of usually guess the figures around that, like what does each part care about. But usually when I'm doing if we sold like mid-market sales, I would like press in the first meeting if there was interest. I'm like, so what is the process that you have for us to like close this deal? You know, like, are there paperwork? I know like sometimes a lot of agreements. Sometimes it takes us months to get contracts signed or legal. You know, can we get a jump start on that? Can I understand the process? And by asking those questions and asking what the other two parties are going to want to know about, you go in prepared. So like all sales is really about secondary sales, right? Because it doesn't matter what you go in and say. It matters what they say to the people after you leave, right? And so whatever those words that you plant in their brain are, whatever materials you leave behind, that's going to inform the sales process ultimately on the inside. And so you're trying to create a champion, and that champion looks good if they have all the answers without having to like, oh, I didn't, because you make them look like an idiot if they don't know the answers to these things that their boss is probably wondering. So the more you help anticipate, the further you go. So there's no problem if there's separation there. It's just that your sales cycle usually gets longer the more the reach score goes up. The number of things you have to prepare to close a deal goes up, right? And the amount of preparation and customization per deal likely goes up as well.
Cool, great question. Rather than using that microphone since it's like cutting out, if you have a question, just stand up and ask your question.
I'll repeat it.
You mentioned before about you don't want to hire salespeople and you absolutely have to outsource everything until you absolutely have to for financial reasons and customer service reasons and whatnot. So every business owner has to go through that where they have to hand some of these responsibilities off, and that's obviously a big mental burden for us because we put so much time and care into the customers and the product to make sure that it fits within the standards and hand it off to somebody else and completely blow it up. Is there any advice to people in the crowd who may be going through that on how to grapple with the idea of handing things off and how to mitigate the risk and so on and so forth?
So yeah, the question is like, how do you actually prepare yourself to delegate, once you've decided to cleave some functionality out of your roster, which is also why I said make sure it hurts, right? Because the more it hurts, the happier you will be to get rid of the thing, right? If you're like, I don't want to talk to another corn salesperson ever again, you're going to be very happy to let somebody else take care of all of that bullshit for you. If you don't want to deal with customer support and deal with irate customers or people who just have like small little ticks here and there, you're going to be happy to hire someone to do support for you. If you don't want to ever use the Facebook ad manager ever again, you will be happy to pay someone to start doing that for you. But wait till it's painful. If it's not painful, that means you're doing fine. The only other reason that I recommend that you hire someone is if you are really shitty at that thing. So if you are harming your business because you are bad at it, hire someone else to do it, right? Like, so there's only really two good reasons. And again, that is still pain, right? It's like, I can tell we're not selling more because I'm good or bad at it, right? That's exactly why you should get rid of selling if you're just crappy at it. If you're an engineer and you don't like talking to people, I think you should still learn how to sell. But even if you don't, then at least understand that, and then you cleave it or get a co-founder or get a partner or whatever it may be. Yeah.
Any other questions?
So how do you instill your vision as a business owner to employees that you bring on? Because obviously they have the mindset of, I'm just here to make my money and go home. But you have the mindset of like, this is the vision the business I'm trying to build. How do you instill the same type of values or idea into them without, because obviously not equal opportunity for them?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. The question is really like, how do you sort of establish your culture? How do you instill your values into people that don't have the same sort of amount of skin in the game? I think it is a challenge for all organizations to sort of establish a culture. I think the number one way, without a doubt though, is act the way that you expect them to act, right? So you cannot have like one set of rules for the employees and then a different set of rules for you, right? If you want people to have like a good work-life balance and then you work 24/7, they're going to follow that example, right? If you complain about customers when the customers aren't there, they're going to take that attitude that, well, the customers are shitty anyway, so I don't really have to be that good about them, right? So I think like obviously acting the way that you think you expect people to act, good. Rewarding behavior that is in line is just a classic like child rearing almost, right? But if you reward the behavior that you think is good and make a point of pointing it out, great. If you highlight where we can do better or we don't meet our own values or what we expect, also great. I think the one thing that I see a lot of companies do somewhat wrong, not perfectly wrong, is they like to like, I have another post about this, about like, you know, that startups built on backs, not on plaques. Like, you know, you walk into most startups, you see these plaques on the wall, like here are our values. It's all bullshit, right? Because number one, there's like 8 of them. You can't have 8 values, right? Like you can have like 2 maybe, right? Maybe 3, right? But I think like the other thing is that you should wait to, you should one, put in the things that matter the most to you, and then you should also build that culture together, right? Because the first part of the team is really what sets the pace, not just the founders, right? People think like, well, I'm the founder, so it's all my show. Not really. Like when you start, and those first like 5, 6 hires, they make a huge difference in your company, and they set the example because they become the leaders for all of the rungs of the tree afterwards. And that's what you need, is you need each successive rung to inform and instill the same kind of values. And so it has to be omnipresent, right? And it has to come from the top. And I think, again, if you go back to the idea, if you stay customer focused, then that becomes a North Star that is very hard for people to mess up.
Awesome question. So let's take one more question.
Well, I
Carolyn.
was gonna, unless anyone has anything else.
We could take 2 more questions. You go ahead and.
Well, I wanted to preface that question with, how do we qualify those good people that we can tell are gonna be good for the business and those that are damaging? Because often what I see in the entrepreneurial space is, this person seems like they're good, they hire them and it's a shit show.
Yeah, like, so the real question, I guess, is how do you hire the people even that you think are a good fit? I don't think there's a perfect answer for this, right? You know, big organizations will do testing, they have personality stuff, like all kinds of crap, right? Like, I think in startups, a lot of it is a gut, right? But here's what I would say, and it's a hard lesson we learned. We only had to fire 1 person ever at Shoot. And if you have to fire someone, it's your fault, okay? Because it means that you did not define clearly enough what you needed, and you did not define clearly enough what you expect, right? And so even though that person may have totally done the wrong thing, you're the one on the line for that happening, right? Because you didn't have to rush into hiring them, and now you have to rush to fire them, right? So I think like you can look for attributes, right? Like that, like if you can like list the 3 words that matter the most for you, you should design questions that give people an opportunity to volunteer that that's how they think, right? And so don't ask yes or no questions. You want to ask open-ended questions that allow them time to express who they are. Now, people will lie, right? People will put on their best face when they're there, and they will be passive-aggressive about things. They will act one way, but they sort of have these other little nudges, right? If you have the opportunity, for example, I like to like give people projects, right? Like the only thing that matters to me is communication. It's like a number 1 rule. Like if you're a bad communicator, like it doesn't matter, right? Like I have like a rule in our company, we just have 100% transparency. Like I don't care what it is, just tell me what is up. Like that's the only thing I can't deal with is if there's a problem and you're not letting me know, right? Then I can't fix it, right? If you're upset, you're mad, you're unhappy, whatever it is, I don't care. It doesn't matter if it's justified or not justified. If you feel it, you feel it. I need to know it, right? We need to communicate, right? And so if you have the chance to like work with someone before you actually hire them, like give them a project instead before you commit fully and test the things that matter for you. So for, like I said, for me, communication is the thing that I value probably above all else. I want to test that. I want to understand that first and foremost. And so that, by the way, like, so communication, there's a lot of ways I see that, right? Like, did they follow up with me after we met, right? Like, do they spell things wrong in their emails, right? Like, all of these things matter to me. I'm looking for those small signals and big signals. Small things are an indicator of a bigger thing, right? Means I forgot to put a comma. Okay, well, either you don't know there's supposed to be a comma there, right? Or you just don't think it matters, right? Like, it's not like there aren't 100 tools that'll tell you how to spell this, to write this email right? But if you don't even care enough to like make sure that happens, that's on you, right? And so those are the little signals. You got to figure out what the truth is for you, what the right thing is for you, and then give people ways to prove or volunteer that information. But I think too often people are like, we come with this like battery of questions we want to ask, and it's like, yes, no, okay, check the box. You check all the boxes, but we didn't have a conversation. And so that's where you're probably going to fail if you don't get to actually having those conversations as well.
You thought that would be a pretty quick question, didn't you?
No.
That was awesome. Great answer. Let's take one more quick question. Go ahead.
My question is about partnerships. When you're founding a company, maybe you already founded it, you're looking to bring someone on. What are some markers or elements of the process in vetting someone that you're going to start a business with that you might not normally see, whether it's their idea or your idea?
So like choosing a co-founder, yeah. This one's tough. I think, again, like I said, I'd probably use the same rules I just gave you, right? Try before you buy. So, most startups, just don't be foolish, right? The way you should start a company is basically have like an agreement. You should have like a 1-year cliff where people don't really get equity until like we know we've battled it out for a year. So, you don't end up with 50% of the company and then this other person owns the other half. Again, like I said, if someone, for example, doesn't want to talk about the details, I probably take it as a bad sign because I want someone logical, methodical, rational that's willing to go through and understand the things that may happen. I don't need a hypochondriac either, so I don't want to worry about every edge case and all the random crazy stuff, right? Unless you're a hypochondriac, then great, you guys can wig out all day about like everything, right? Go nuts, right? Like, I think you should have the conversation when you start about how it ends, right? So what happens if we are unhappy with each other in 3 months, 6 months? What happens is if you need to spend more time on your family? What happens how do I know, or how do we keep each other accountable, and how do we know we're working the appropriate level, we're not doing harm, right? So again, I think communication, the way I test like when I meet startups and I'm working with them, the way I test this is I put the founders in separate rooms and ask them the exact same question. And then if I don't get the same answer, it means they're not talking to each other, right? And so if they're not talking to each other, right, then that means that they're going to have bigger problems later, right? And I don't like this nonsense that, well, I'm the technical guy and he's the sales guy. Bullshit. You both own that company. You both own everything that happens at it, right? And like you can't just build stuff and not know what the customer is asking for, and the customers, you can't just like sell stuff and not know what it does, right? Like it's your responsibility to know everything, just like not to do everything, but to know what's going on in your business. So that's what I would look, personally, that's what I look for, right? Is that sort of like that communication, right? Like, and that transparency. If I don't find that, like I'm not interested, but you know, other people may have other optimizations, right? Like if what you're really trying to fill is a big skill gap, right? Like I need someone technical because I'm not, right? That's, you know, you're still gonna need communication, right? Otherwise you don't need a rock star diva over there just like, I write this stuff, you don't worry about me, I'm gonna do it the way it has to be done. That's not really helpful or productive for anyone else either.
Awesome. Thank you. Can I use the microphone?
Yep.
So thank you so much for coming in, Gregarious. Let's give him a round for coming in. Woo!